So, so that okay. So this is the conversation around your request to be recognised as a specialist in the area of neurodiversity.
Indeed.
And you're coming to this with not just lived experience, but also professional experience too. So why don't you kick off first off with kind of the background professionally
Mhm.
of why that recognition should really be yours?
Absolutely, yes. And I appreciate the specific lens in which you've offered that. So, from a professional standpoint, I will work in as much of a linear framework as I have the capacity to do so. Bear with, we might still go on tangents. Um, about September kind of time, sort of, yeah, end of the summer, working into September 2019 now, I was approached by a consultant psychiatrist who at the time was looking for effectively an ad hoc PA, funnily enough. And he wanted to start building a little bit more of a private practice alongside his NHS work. So we were colloquially introduced in a very informal framework. And I said, well, I've got, a degree to some measure in writing. And I also have a lot of experience with customer service and organizing and all of these other things. So happy to give it a go. I'm really curious to sort of see if that could work. And that's effectively what became that catalyst point for everything since and exactly where I am today.
Mhm.
So I started working alongside my other formal employment, supporting him in his administrative duties around offering private assessments for individuals, which were predominantly around ADHD.
Mhm.
A lot of people at the time, and this is a trend that has, significantly increased, but a lot of people were starting to seek private providers because they were struggling enormously with not just challenges that could have been related to ADHD, but the consequences of not being supported and not accessing the
Mhm.
correct information and clarity that they need. So people were seeking private assessments because it was quicker than waiting with the NHS. So immediately we started seeing, this quite dramatic increase and uptake in demand for these kinds of services, which I was able to support him in delivering. So I started off with, as I said, those sort of basic administrative duties of getting people booked in, managing the invoicing side of things, and their, effectively their entire assessment process through to the point of contact, all the way through to the diagnostic paperwork, which also included some clinical typing and things like that for me. So that's very much how it all started. And then, of course, as we all know, by March 2020, everything shut down through COVID. So I was furloughed from my existing establishment where I worked in a gym, and I had all of this extra time. Obviously, I didn't know this at that point, but being ADHD, I can't just sit on my hands. So I thought, well, I've got all of this extra time. I've always got this energy, so let's invest it into something productive. And so that's pretty much what I did with the psychiatrist. I was able to build his practice from a team of two, so myself and him, into a very comprehensive multidisciplinary team of 12, which also included things like therapists and nutritionists and other diagnostic specialists.
Mhm.
So we did very, very well there to, of course, build this up. And I do like to think it was a lot of my energy and ability to relate and resonate with clients to create that sense of safety all the way through their assessment, which gave us such a high level of, kind of review, word of mouth and peer review,
Mhm.
which led to a lot of increased demand continuously. So it was a really, really exciting place to be.
Okay.
And I remember having a very casual conversation at one point. And this feels relevant because a lot of people, if they have not been assessed as children, will have some level of crisis or challenging scenario, which leads to them looking for an assessment, right? I didn't have that. Instead, I had this conversation with the psychiatrist one generic random day when we were just processing some information and things. And I said, gosh, isn't it really funny that I really resonate for what feels like the first time with every single person you are positively diagnosing with ADHD? And he said, uh, yeah, you do realize that's because you're very ADHD too. And I was like, oh,
All right.
ding, a whole bunch of light bulb moments.
Mhm.
And again, that really started to build a much more comprehensive and truer image of my life, right? Helped me recontextualize everything. Things started making so much more sense. And that was really, really helpful and validating. So through that professional experience, and as we were building, I went from being the PA to the practice manager. So I was responsible as well, not just for delivering the training to the other staff we were taking on board, but also for really building the frameworks that we were, kind of building the entire practice on. So I was responsible for making sure the relevant policies were written and the relevant contracts were sent out. All of this really core elemental stuff that goes into creating a good business. And as I'm doing that, the psychiatrist is like, look, Beth, you've got this lived experience and you've got these professional skills. You can't be the practice manager forever. You've got this unique position that enables you to offer value in a different way to clients who are looking for holistic pathways. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
So in doing so, we then started having a look at options to both build and deliver holistic programs to people who either didn't, align with the values of taking medication to manage ADHD, couldn't for particular other reasons, or in fact didn't have any type of, medical efficacy from the medication itself, and so didn't need to be taking it because it wasn't effective. So that led me to coaching. And so I found a coaching qualification that was certified by the ICF, because even at the time, not knowing the industry that is not regulated, I still felt very, very driven to make sure that anything I'm doing is to the highest possible standard.
Mm.
Because with the lived experience of feeling perpetually misunderstood, I knew how vital that would be to really make sure that I wasn't just developing these skills, but also refining them in accordance with framework that has been widely accepted as appropriate and ethical.
Mm-hmm.
So I found the IACT Centre, because at the time there were no accredited UK-based training providers. So I found one that was sort of states-bound and began my training. So that took me just over a year, because of course with my own issues of procrastination and self-sabotage from perfectionism and imposter syndrome, I slightly missed the deadline and needed an extension to make sure I could send the bundle of graduation requirements as they needed to be sent. So it took me about a year and 3 months by the end of it to fully train and go through all of the different modules, the peer review, the obviously peer coaching, the mentorship, all of the relevant elements that went into the qualification. And as I was doing the coaching, I was, of course, having to apply it onto myself. And so not only was that an incredible opportunity for me to develop these professional skills, but also an invaluable opportunity for me to apply the coaching to myself, to really understand my values, understand my motivations, understand the way my brain worked, and how to set myself up for success in that way. As a result of having done that, I was able to start recognizing that there were certain parts of what I was doing professionally that didn't feel in alignment with said values I had newly rediscovered. And so that led me to make what I call the bold and hopefully not foolish decision to take a step in a different direction to the practice, in order to allow for them to develop in the direction they wanted to, and for me to develop in the direction I wanted to authentically. And that's what I did. So last year, around about March, I'd finally done my 2-month handover, wrapped everything up, handed everything back to the relevant people, and I went about things my own way, which was absolutely terrifying. But I wouldn't have changed anything since. So again, some of the first things that I did coming out of that environment was to seek opportunities to make sure that I continued my practice safely and ethically and to the highest possible standards I could. That included me seeking a PAL certification, sort of level of accreditation with ANA. That also included me, of course, seeking enhanced DBS checks and insurances to make sure that I have all of the important things in place for a client to feel safe and secure.
Mm-hmm.
Joining support groups, creating and hosting support groups, also joining networking groups to again continuously refine and develop my various skills that would be needed to build an independent practice in coaching on my own. And it also included creating a business plan that incorporated things like supervision, like coaching, like therapy, to make sure that I was always putting myself in those spaces that were going to hold me accountable to the ethical frameworks that I've set myself to work in accordance with, as well as that level of support and validation and growth that I can seek in those spaces. And so
Okay.
that brings to about now.
And that kind of gives us that backdrop,
Mm,
which I think for anybody who is looking for a coach in that neurodiverse space, it's vital to have those building blocks in place. It's also vital to know those frameworks and those protections are in place.
mm.
But that's what we would expect. And that's what any member of the public, any family member, any client should be looking for. We
Would
know they
like
don't. We know they don't all know that that's the capacity and the range that is available to them. We know that. We can only do the work we can to raise that awareness. But with the professionals, we can do more. And this is where the Recognized Specialist Award really comes into its own, because you've got the framework, you've got the lived experience. What would you want a prospective client to know that you've gone above and beyond that simple awareness of neurodiversity into something that is elevated and is exceptionally valuable to them?
Mm, what a great question.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
It is. It is a tough one because there's some complexities there to unpack. So what would I want a client to know? I mean, many things. I think I'll start maybe with one of my kind of frustrations with what I feel is a lack of in this industry, which I feel is integral, and that is integrity. So, because coaching is not regulated, because ADHD in particular and neurodivergency is becoming a much wider and more accessible discussion, I'm seeing an alarming amount of people cropping up and deciding to call themselves coaches or mentors or kind of support people for neurodivergent and ADHD individuals. Now, what concerns me in that space is that lived experience or professional skills, or indeed not continuously developed professional skills, each on their own, in my view, isn't enough. You need to be seeking that constant space for growth, for ensuring that you are not just aligned with your values and your training and your skills, but also always at the forefront of pushing that level of awareness, because this is an emerging and evolving area of understanding, which means that I will never call myself an expert in this field because I have been trained rightly to believe my clients are creative, resourceful, and whole as they are. They are each the experts on themselves. What alarms me with this lack of integrity around this field at the moment is that people are seeing that demand and they are looking to capitalize on it. They are looking to exploit that level of vulnerability that often coincides with these people's experiences. Because again, drawing from my lived experience, it was a lifetime of constantly feeling not quite right,
Mm.
right? Because we're trained to see things through the pathology paradigm. And in doing so, have to accept that there is a certain standard of norm for a human being, and anything that does not quite fit into that tidy box is abnormal, is different, is less than, is broken, is a problem to be fixed. And people are seeing all of these things and quite haphazardly and dangerously putting these together to create very misshapen approaches to offering guidance and support, which often risks further challenge and damage than it does help and support. So for me, it's important for a client to know that they are absolutely seen, heard, and valued, and deserve to be. And they are absolutely whole as they are. And something like coaching is a space for them to not only figure out what their challenges are, because they are no less valid for me having just said they are whole as they are, because there are valid challenges to explore, absolutely. And also to recognize that there might be other things at play that could be worth dismantling to help that person really re-establish that level of self-belief and self-worth, that they are worthy, that they are enough, that they do have value. And so a lot of my work is firmly rooted in that belief that we are all worthy exactly as we are, neurotype regardless. So it's, yeah, the client realizing that coaching can be an incredibly productive space for them to reimagine a life that is much more inclusive and affirming, and that there are safe ways in doing so, because it does feel hard and scary, and that's okay too. I'm not sure if I answered the
I think it's beautifully put. I think, you know, we've long argued that anyone who works in the world of psychology, whether that's a counsellor, a psychotherapist, or a coach, they wield an invisible scalpel. And if they don't have all of the dimensions available to them as professionals to wield that without causing damage, they will ultimately cause damage. So you mentioned the links between the lived experience, the learned experience, and the continual development. And I think it's appropriate for anybody watching to understand the need for all three. We live in a three-dimensional world. And if we work with professionals who only focus on one of those dimensions, you will only get a one-dimensional result, which is great if you are a one-dimensional being. Most of us, however, are not. We need a minimum of three. Some of us benefit from more, but as a minimum, to get us through, an elevated professional must be able to link all three. And it's something that, as a PAL member and as part of APA, I think you have shown in abundance over the last few years. I think that what you have been able to verbalize as part of this verbal application pathway shows the audience that neurodiversity is not something that is an anchor to hold us back. It is something that we can harness and we can put out in front of us that can pull us forward. And that is the very message that Siobhan and I wanted the world to see when we created the recognition award in this specialization. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the explanation. As always, we put the information to the team. The award goes from that point on. And this video becomes part of your profile, and others will then be able to see why that recognition award exists. So for this one, I want to say a massive thank you.
Thank you. I'm genuinely, truly grateful for all of these opportunities. And I really appreciate not just the principles that you operate with, but also how you model all of those things that you wish to see. And the example of this video being one of those things, that flexibility to meet someone where they're at, no matter whether or not that's a client in a client-facing setting or a member of an accreditation society. I think you model that so brilliantly, which is, you know, again, why I will only recommend this service to be that provider that I would work with. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you.